Shall we? All right, let's do it. So, welcome, folks. This is course or session number PC339. Session I like to call Managing Resource Supply and Demand with Microsoft Project Server 2010. My name's Tony Zink. I'll be your presenter for the next hour and I think we got an hour and 15 minutes, right? Okay. So, just a little bit about myself. I'm not going to bore you too much with this, but I've been doing this stuff for a while. I've been working with Microsoft Project since version 95. Does anybody have me beat? Anybody work with older versions than Microsoft Project 95? Yeah, how far do you go back? You don't want to admit? Anybody want to admit how far back they go with Project? Original DOS version. Wow. What was before 95? Can anybody answer that? Okay, so there was a 4.1. There was no version. There was version 3. You said no version 2, and then there was a DOS version before that. You said version 1, and then a DOS version before that. Okay, and it's actually my understanding that Microsoft acquired this product from somebody. Do you happen to know where along that timeline they acquired it? They acquired the original DOS version. Okay. So version 1 was Microsoft's first version of this product. So it goes back quite a while. I don't go back that far. I've been working with Project Server since version 2002. I did not have the fortune or misfortune, depending on how you look at it, of working with Project Central, which was Microsoft's first server-based project management tool. I've worked with these tools in various sectors, automotive. I come from Michigan, so cars are near and dear to my heart. I've worked in lots of different industries, though, and I work for a little company called EPM Architects. You can stop by our booth and hang out with us and crack jokes and whatnot later, or the whole rest of this week if you want to. That would be fantastic. Anybody know what this is? Did I hear QR code? Yeah? So this is a two-dimensional barcode. I'm going to show this at the end of the presentation also. Those of you who have smartphones, you may have a little app on there that you can use to read this, and this will take you to some goodies that we have on our website that you can download. Okay. This actually, just a little bit of history on this. This is actually called a QR code. It's basically a two-dimensional barcode. You might see this on some shipping like FedEx and UPS packages. It holds more information than a regular barcode. This was actually invented by the folks in the automotive industry for tracking parts and the part of the assembly process. So I'm going to show this again towards the end of the session. Then you can queue up your little application on your smartphone, or maybe even during the next hour or so, you can go and download it from wherever you like to download your apps from, and then you'll be able to scan this, and this will take you to a link online where you can download some interesting things from our EPM Architects website. All right, so why are we here? We've got some different challenges when it comes to resource management, right? We've got, when things run late or they run over budget, we end up with angry customers, right? Sometimes we have to, because we have resource shortages, we have to hire expensive temporary workers. So that blows our budget sometimes. And, sometimes we have idle workers that we don't know about, because for whatever reason, they're hiding under the radar. And, so if we knew about it, if we knew where we had this extra capacity, okay, we could maybe get some more stuff done, right? So I'm going to show you some ways that we can maybe deal with some of these challenges using some of the built-in functionality in Microsoft Project and Project Server 2010. What I'm going to show you here, what we're going to talk about here, and what I'm going to show you here during the next hour or so, this is all built-in functionality. Okay, no custom development required. All right? Which is just the way I like it. The folks that I work with will tell you that too. All right, so here's what we're going to cover in this session. Resource supply and demand management. What does it mean? What is it? Forecasting techniques. So we're going to be basically looking out into the future and trying to find places where resource supply and resource demand don't line up. Okay, and so we're just going to kind of mention there's a couple of different techniques for going out and looking at that, forecasting that into the future. We're going to talk about a type of forecasting technique called workload analysis, and what does that process look like. Going to talk a little bit about Project Server and the Enterprise Resource Pool for those of you who aren't familiar with them, just to kind of set a base foundation for the demo that I'm going to show you later. We're going to talk about work resource capacities and workloads. So when we're looking at supply and demand when it comes to the resources that you have available to you, this is a baseline that we're setting as far as terminology goes. Okay. Now we're going to get into the demo, the live demo. I'm going to try to get to that as quickly as I can so that we can get to the meat of the presentation here. And then I'm going to talk to you about what are the next steps that you might want to take if you want to try to implement this if you have a Project Server environment. Okay? All right. What is resource supply and demand management? Okay? It sounds fancy, but it's really not that complicated. All right, we've seen charts like this. If you ever took any kind of an economics class, you saw the supply and demand curves, and they tend to eventually meet in the middle, where price meets demand, and that's where things actually take place. That's where the rubber meets the road. I'm borrowing from some concepts that are provided in this area called human resource planning. Okay, some of you who may have a background in human resources, there might be some terminology here that will be familiar to you. Basically, it's the process of systematically placing the right number of people with the right skills in the right positions at the right time. Okay, basically finding the right people who can do the work at the right time and putting them on your projects and get stuff done. Okay, and so. Okay, the upper chart there, that's, again, the traditional sort of supply and demand chart that we're probably all familiar with, if you've taken any kind of economic class before. The lower chart is something we're going to attempt to generate using the tools in Microsoft Project and Project Server. The upper kind of darker line on the chart there is your demand curve over time. Okay, so we're adding a time dimension to this. The upper supply and demand chart, there's no time dimension to that. Okay. And the lower, the lighter or green bar or line that's squiggling its way across that lower chart there, that's your supply curve. So basically, the lower line is what do you have? What do you have of the resources you have available to you? What are they capable of? How much work are they capable of doing during any given point in time? And then the upper demand curve or demand line, that tells you of all the projects that you have in your system at any point in time, okay, how much work is it going to take to get that stuff done? All right. So anytime the supply curve or the supply line is above the demand, you have a surplus. You're capable of doing more. Anytime where they're the opposite, demand is higher than supply, you have a shortage. You don't have enough resources. So therefore, stuff probably is not going to get done. Therefore, you probably are going to, again, go back to the thing where if you need to get that stuff done, you're going to have to probably spend more money to hire some temporary workers or some expensive overpriced consultants or what have you. Or that stuff that's not getting, it just won't get done, it'll get delayed, and now your timelines are blown. So there's different ways to forecast things. Okay, there's I tend to lean more towards the lower items on that list. Trend analysis, mathematical models, workload analysis. Trend analysis, that's basically the process of looking at historical information and trying to project that off into the future to predict where things are going. Okay, people try to do that with the stock market. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. But you're just assuming that the historical information is going to be a predictor of what's going to happen in the future, right? Which that doesn't always happen. Okay? There's, some organizations have these complex mathematical models for trying to represent what's going to happen in the future. I've done work for some of the automotive companies in the past, and sometimes they have these complex, these monstrous spreadsheets that they use for trying to predict, resource utilization out into the future and whatnot, or some other sort of, homegrown tools that they've made. I'm going to show you a little more of a systematic approach that we'll just call workload analysis. Again, using some of these tools that are available to us in Microsoft Project and Project Server 2010. Okay, so here's the basic process that we would walk through if we were doing this. Okay, now the first two boxes there, forecast demand and forecast supply, those are really interchangeable. Okay, it doesn't really matter which of those you do first. But basically, you're looking at, okay, what is our demand? Of all the projects that we're trying to take on, okay, what demand is that going to place on the resources that we have? Or even resources that we don't have, okay? How much work is it going to take to get all this stuff done that we'd like to do? Okay, we also then forecast supply. So, okay, what are the resources that we do have? Okay, and how much work are they capable of during any given point in time? We compare them and identify, again, where do we have the shortages or where do we have the overages, and then respond accordingly. Okay, if we have more supply than demand, we can maybe give those folks some more work to do, get more stuff done. Okay, if we have more demand than supply, then okay, we have probably more of a serious problem, right? So again, do we hire people? Do we retrain people? Maybe the people who have some excess capacity in other groups that maybe that have related skills. Okay, can we retrain them and bring them over to this project and get some help from them to keep the project on track? Okay, there's different ways that we might respond to this, to either of those situations. But this is the basic 4-step process, if you will. Okay, so now we're going to get a little more technical, not too technical, okay, but we're going to start talking about the tool now. So how many of you folks currently use some version of Microsoft Project Server? Okay, most of you. Okay, good. So this probably shouldn't be anything new to you folks, or these you folks who raised your hands. Okay, Project Server, I like to call it a work management system. Okay, traditionally it was designed as a project management tracking and management system for managing project work. Okay, those of you who've used Project Server for any amount of time at all, you probably very quickly learned that you can track other types of work in there also, and a lot of people actually do that. Non-project work, administrative time, meetings, sick time, vacation, support work, maintenance work, all sorts of stuff. If you sort of work the system a little bit, you can get all that stuff in there and keep all of your work in one place. Okay, so then you're not tracking your project work over here, and you're tracking your non-project work over in some other system. Okay, it's nice to get it all in one place. People go to that one place to see everything that they're responsible for. They can go to that one place to generate reports, so on and so forth. So there's lots of different things you can do in Project Server. There's all these different features that you can take advantage of. That doesn't necessarily mean that you should, at least not all in one go. It's capable of doing demand and portfolio management, project and resource management. Those are that's the area where most people tend to focus on when they're implementing a tool like Project Server. There's all these collaboration features that allow people to track documents and issues and risks and all these other things that are associated with related to getting stuff done on projects, and business intelligence and reporting features. There's actually some really cool features that I'm going to use as part of my demo in a little while that are new in Project Server 2010. They're not entirely new. If you put the right products together in the earlier versions, like Project Server 2007, okay, then you could have done some of these things, but they make it really easy now in Project Server 2010. Okay, so basically you load a whole bunch of stuff in there. You load all your resources in there and create this thing called an enterprise resource pool, and that's where you can keep track of all of your resources and what are they doing and when and so on and so forth. You load all your projects in there and manage those all in one place, so you have one place to go for all of that information. And again, all the other data and artifacts that are associated with those projects. And then you organize that information. You can broadcast that back out to whoever needs it, right? In a nutshell, you put all that stuff in, the gears turn, and you can pull out whatever you need, essentially. Okay. Again, shouldn't be anything new for those of you who are familiar with Project Server. Let's drill a little bit deeper and talk about this enterprise resource pool for a minute. So the enterprise resource pool, this is a central place where you can store all of your different types of resources. Okay, work resources, material resources, cost resources, all of your different types of resources. You can put them in one place and use them on your projects. So now, a work resource is any type of a resource where you schedule and pay for their time. Okay, usually it's people, real live kicking and screaming human beings. Not necessarily. Okay, it could be a crane or a conference room, some sort of facility. Anything where you schedule and pay for their time, that's a work resource, according to Project Server anyway. A material resource, okay, that's another thing that you might use to get stuff done in your projects. It might be cabling, or it might be lumber, it might be gravel. Different types of consumable materials where basically every unit of that material is identical or considered to be identical to every other unit of that material. Okay, and there's a per unit cost, and so you can combine those with all of your costs attributed to your work resources, and then you've got a third type there called cost resources. This is a resource type that Microsoft created in the 2007 version of the product. Okay, prior to 2007, there was no such thing as a cost resource. That's basically used for tracking things that, other types of fixed costs that you might incur on your projects that cannot be easily represented with work resources or material resources. So you might have travel expenses, you might have shipping costs, hardware purchases, maybe you hire a vendor or a contractor or hire somebody to create something and deliver it for you. Okay, so deliverables-based work or fixed-price kind of a work, you can represent that with these cost resources in Microsoft Project and in Project Server. We are going to focus on work resources in this session. Okay, again, those resources where you schedule and pay for their time. Okay, so there's that time element that I mentioned earlier. All right, so the way that I'm going to show you how to do this is using a combination of a couple different types of work resources, generic resources and non-generic resources. Okay? A generic resource basically represents a type of person, we'll say, a carpenter, an electrician, a database analyst, a .NET developer. Okay, this is essentially when you're doing your early resource planning on a project. Okay, maybe you don't know yet exactly which people you want to put on which tasks in your project, but you do know what kinds of people you need. Okay, I'm going to need a database analyst to build this database for me out in 2 months from now. I'm going to need a carpenter to frame in this room in this new office building. Okay, you don't know who yet. Maybe you don't care. Just for now, you use these generic resources as placeholders in your project schedules. And then later, you can replace them with real people. Once the time gets closer to the time when that work actually is going to be done. Okay. So, one quick thing here. We're going to, back one more here. Okay, so as part of this this workload analysis process that we're talking about here, we're going to analyze their assigned work. Okay, so picture you've got a project schedule, or maybe a bunch of project schedules with generic resources assigned to them, assigned to do work in the future. Okay, so when we ultimately end up generating these charts, okay, we're going to be looking at to represent the future planned work or the demand. on your resources, we're going to look at how much work is assigned to these different types of generic resources. To look at your supply, okay, we're going to look at the real people and what is their remaining availability. Okay, so basically we're looking at what is their capacity. You subtract out how much work they've already been assigned to maybe on some projects, and what's left is their remaining availability. So these are real people. So this is how we're going to model basically the supply and demand on our resources, and then we can compare them to generate like one of those charts with the lines that zigzag across the timeline. So a little bit more about capacity, assigned work, and remaining availability. Okay? So basically, the capacity of a resource, of a work resource, is any resource. It's how much work that resource is capable of doing during any given period of time. Okay? So if we're looking at if that period of time happens to be a week, okay, then maybe a resource is capable of doing 40 hours of work during that week, or 60 or 80, depending on what you do for a living. So that's the capacity. How much is that person capable of doing? Assigned work, okay, this is how much they're actually assigned to during that particular time period. Okay? Maybe a person has 40 hours capacity during a week, and they're assigned to 20 hours of actual work. That would leave them with 20 hours of remaining availability. That's how much more work you could give to that person before they become what's called over-allocated in the tool. Okay. Here's an example of we're looking at a month time frame in this case. So if we're looking at any given resource, maybe their capacity for that month would be 160 hours. Okay. And then we take that resource and we assign them to 128 hours of work during that month. That means that they have 32 hours of remaining availability. We can give them 32 more hours of work before we kind of hit their capacity line. So now those numbers are going to fluctuate. Okay? So that bottom line number, that's what we're going to be looking at for real people, the remaining availability. Okay? That can be reduced by either lowering that top line, the capacity, or by increasing the assigned work. Either way, that gap between them is going to change. Okay? So again, going back to the example here of a month time frame, if somebody has 80 hours of assigned work, okay, then they have 80 hours of remaining availability, right? If you drop that 160 hours down to 120, keeping the 80 hours of assigned work fixed, now their remaining availability has been shrunk down to 40 hours during that month. They can take on 40 more hours of work. Or if you kept the top line, 160 hours of capacity, constant, and you added more work to them, okay, that's going to shrink that gap too, down from 80 down to 40. So these are the three main variables we're going to be thinking about when we're looking at how we're modeling this stuff in Project Server. Demo time. So I'm going to show you folks in the tool in a live demo here how to model and forecast resource demand, how to model and forecast resource supply, and then how to compare them to give you, where's your excess supply or where's your shortage, so that you can now then react accordingly. Okay, that being said, here's a live Microsoft Project Server environment that I'm going to use to demonstrate these concepts. This is Project Web App, or PWA for short. Just a little bit of history. In previous versions of Project Server, this web interface was still called PWA. It was short for Project Web Access. But now everything's an app, right? So now it represents Project Web App, but it's still PWA. So this is the web interface for if there's any of you who are unfamiliar. There's two main interfaces to Project Server. There's the web interface, PWA. This is the interface that most people would use when they're interacting with Project Server. And the other interface is Microsoft Project or Project Professional or Project Pro, depending on who you ask. Okay, it's that desktop client that your project managers and schedulers and so forth are going to use to create and update and manage the actual project schedules. Okay, this is more of a communication and broadcasting tool, if you will. Okay, so here's the other interface here. Microsoft Project. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually go and open up a project that I've already created in this system here. This is a phase 1 of a 3-phase EPM deployment project. Okay, there's a lot of stuff going on here. There's a deliverable section. We don't need to. It's just a bunch of deliverable milestones. We can collapse that down. And so this is a project schedule that's got 64 line items in it. So one of the concepts that I'm going to demonstrate here is, in order to be able to basically compare your supply and demand, is using these generic resources versus real named human resources. Okay, and the way that I'm going to demonstrate doing that is by attaching skills to these different types of resources so that we can line them up. Okay, because it wouldn't really make a whole lot of it wouldn't be really very meaningful if we just said we've got 1,000 resources in our organization and we have a capacity of 10,000 hours and we have a demand of 12,000 hours. Okay, so we're short a couple hundred hours, but we don't know where or why we're short. Okay, so we have to go digging and analyzing this stuff. So it'd be nice to know what types of resources we're short on. Okay, instead of just saying we're short. Okay, are we short of people who have database analysis skills? Are we short of electricians or mechanical engineers? Who are we short on, so that we can go and maybe find more of those types of resources? Okay, so this can be a one-step or a two-step process, depending on how you want to go about doing it. But when you're first building your project schedule, one thing you can do as a part of your planning process is, of course, lay out all of the work that needs to be done and organize it into phases and put in milestones to indicate important events and so forth. But then, to take that a step further, to help you to find the right resources for the right tasks, we could create a field to store that information. So, how many of you folks are familiar with creating custom fields in Microsoft Project? Okay, or in Project Server. Okay, basically, there's all these different, in this case here we have a list of tasks, and for all these different tasks in a project schedule, all right, we have different columns or fields of information that describe those tasks. Okay, every task has a name, every task has a duration, every task has a start date and a finish date and so forth. Okay, and that's all fine and good, except what if we want to be able to attach a skill, a required skill to each one of these tasks? Okay, what kind of a person are we going to need to complete each one of these tasks? All right. Well, there is no built-in field in Microsoft Project called skill or required skill or task skill. Okay. This is one that I created. Okay. I didn't have to write any code to do it. This doesn't require any custom development. This is really just a configuration option in Project Server. Okay. And you can do this in Microsoft Project too, even if you don't have Project Server to work with. You can create what are called local custom fields that just exist in your project. Okay. But if you have Project Server, then you can ask your local friendly Project Server administrator to create an enterprise custom field. Maybe it's called task skill. And then that field can be used across all of your projects in your organization. Okay. So regardless of the project, you can insert a column like I just did here called maybe task skill. And then you can just go down through that column and specify what kind of skills are necessary to complete each one of these tasks. And I've even gone so far as to create a list of all the different skills that people have in my organization. And so I can attach these to any of these tasks in my project, so that when it does come time to staff this project, I have a better idea of who I need to go looking for to put on each one of these tasks. Okay? This is actually quite a long list, very detailed. And if you look at it, if you start looking at these carefully, you'll even see that these are IT-related skills. Okay, so you can just imagine if we actually branched out and did this across the entire organization. We'd have a big long list of IT skills and marketing skills and sales skills and accounting skills and all the different types of skills you might have in a company, right? So this is a list that can be quite cumbersome to manage. Okay, and this is where I would suggest, if you are going to go down this path of doing skills-based resource management, okay, you might want to start talking to your HR folks. Okay, maybe they have a database someplace where they're actually capturing what kinds of skills the people have in your organization. Okay, or if not, maybe it's time to start. Okay, but you certainly don't want to be doing the same thing that they're already doing. All right, if they've already got this information, this is a lot of work to go out and capture all the skills that all the people in your organization have. So if they already have it, start talking to them. Maybe they can give you this information and you key it in, or even better yet, maybe you can even hook this system to maybe some other system where your HR department stores this information maybe in a database someplace, and you can just pull that information over automatically. Okay, that's not something that would be in the box functionality. That would be something where you would have to develop some sort of a connector between these two systems, but it can be done. So at any rate, what I've done here is I've gone down through these project schedules, and I've attached skills, required skills, to each of the tasks in the project here. So just again as an example here, maybe this task is going to require project management skills to do. Maybe even all three of these. I'll just do a quick little fill down there. That's a little Excel trick for those of you who aren't aware. You can set a value in one cell, and then select that cell as well as several cells below it, and just do a Control-D on your keyboard to do a fill down. A lot of these Excel tricks that you might have come to grow and love, you can use them in Microsoft Project too. Okay. So now there's a couple reasons why you might want to do something like this. This makes it easier when it comes time to staff your project, to find the right people. As long as you have your people tagged with these same skills, you can just match them up to staff your projects. Okay. Another reason why you may want to do this, though, is now that you have skills attached, and probably even work hours, if I insert the work column here. Okay. Those of you who know anything about data management and databases, all this stuff is stored in a set of databases on a server someplace. So if we've got a list of a whole bunch of tasks in this project and in other projects, and we've got skills attached to them, and we've got work hours attached to them, it's pretty easy to see how you could generate reports that can tell you across all of your projects, okay, how much of different types of skilled workers are you going to need. Okay. What I've also done here in this schedule is I've assigned some generic resources. I don't need this notes column. I've assigned generic resources to all of the tasks in this project. Okay, so you're not going to, if you look through down this resource names column, you're not going to see any real person's names. You're going to see things like technical instructor and project manager and SQL DBA and so forth. Okay, so this is how we're representing the demand on our resources. All right. When I publish this information out to Project Server, I can go in and generate a report very easily with Excel to pull this information out. So this project, combined with all the other projects in the system, I can report on this, how many hours of work are assigned to the technical instructor during any given time period. That's our demand. How many hours of work are assigned to the project manager role, okay, across whatever time period we're interested in. That's our demand. Okay. Now, if I switch back over to my web interface, PWA again, I'm going to take you to an area here called the Resource Center. Okay, so this Resource Center, this is a place where you have access to all of the resources in your enterprise resource pool. And we've got different views of these resources that we can look at. Here's a real simple all resources view that comes built into Microsoft Project Server when you install it. This comes right out of the box like this. And this just gives you a real simple list of all the different resources that are in the system as of right now. And like I mentioned earlier, there are 3 different types of resources available for you to use on projects in Microsoft Project and in Project Server. Cost resources, material resources, and work resources. And so you can see here, this particular view just shows you a breakdown of those different types of resources. Okay? What this doesn't show you, though, is, if we drill into the work resources area, it does not show us doesn't show us easily which of these resources are real people and which of them are just these generic placeholders. Okay? Now, yeah, if you might see a generic column here that you can look down and say, okay, is that generic? No, 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 no. If we scroll down here a little bit further, we'll see some yeses, okay? But, who wants to go hunting for a yes in a column, okay? I mean, this is really not a very large resource pool. We're looking at, somewhere between 50 and 60 resources, I believe, in this resource pool, okay? It's really quite small. I mean, you might have a project server environment where you have hundreds or even thousands of resources in your resource pool that are available to put on projects. Okay, so you certainly don't want to go hunting for yeses in a generic column. So there's different ways you can handle this. You can there's auto filtering types of capability that are in here, just like you might have available to you in Excel. But I've actually gone ahead and created a generic resources view. This is something, again, your local friendly project server administrator can do for you. No coding required. This is about a 5-minute job to create a view like this. So here's a list of all the generic resources that I have in the enterprise resource pool. Okay? So anytime these generic resources are assigned to things in projects, that's again, we're representing a demand on the resources in our resource pool. And these are, again, they're going to be ultimately replaced with real people when it comes time to do the work. But again, for future resource planning, use generics to represent that demand. Okay? So now, I'm going to take you into an area, maybe some of you have seen, maybe some of you haven't. This is a new feature in Project Server 2010 called the Business Intelligence Center. This is a super cool place where you can go and build reports pretty easily without having to get a developer involved. Nothing against developers. Okay? I'm not a developer, so I like to create things with Excel. How many of you folks have taken an Excel spreadsheet and connected it up to a data source of some sort, maybe a SQL database or something? Okay, and pulled data out. Okay, quite a few of you. You pulled data out of that database, perhaps, and displayed it in Excel. Okay, you can do that actually quite easily, we've been able to do that for several versions of Excel. This is not something that's new. I remember doing it back in Excel 2003, maybe even 2000. Okay, I don't know where they introduced that feature into Excel, but at any rate, rather than just typing static information into a spreadsheet, okay, you can take an Excel spreadsheet and connect it up to a data source and pull information out of a database, let's say. And now basically you have the beginnings of a report. And you can format that information and organizing in such a way that now you've got a report without having to get some developers involved to create SQL Server reporting services reports or Crystal reports or whatever your custom report solution of choice is. How many of you folks use SQL Server reporting services for report generation? Okay. Anybody use Crystal reports? I know that might be a little bit of a dirty word in this room. Anybody use any other types of reporting tools outside of those ones that I mentioned? No? Okay, yeah, those are pretty much the heavy hitters that I'm aware of anyway. So in this Business Intelligence Center that's now included in Project Server 2010, they've given us a lot of tools that make it really easy for us to create reports. Okay? Using that technology that I just described to you, where you can take an Excel spreadsheet, connect it to a data source, pull the data out, create your report pretty easily. And I'm not going to show you all the different features and functions of this Business Intelligence Center necessarily, but I will take you into one area here just to kind of give you a little bit of a flavor. I'm going to take you into the sample reports area first. And this is a list of sample reports that Microsoft has given us. They're included in the box. Okay? You can use these as is, or you can take these and customize them or tweak them a bit and use these to create your own custom reports. But basically, there's just several examples here of some really simple reports that you can take a look at, like this simple projects list. Okay? This is just an Excel file. Okay? But only this Excel file is connected to a database where all of your project and resource data are stored. Okay? It looks a lot like Excel. Doesn't look exactly like Excel, though. We're still in the web browser. Okay? This is using a feature that's actually available in SharePoint Server 2010 Enterprise Edition called, anybody know what the name of this feature is? For Excel Services, right. So this is something that Microsoft included in SharePoint Server 2007. Okay, so this is not a new feature, but it is new the fact that they've sort of rolled it all together and made it available for us to use with Project Server for reporting purposes. So basically what's going on here is it's taking an Excel spreadsheet, or allows you to take an Excel spreadsheet and publish it to the web and just view it in the web browser, okay, without having to launch Excel or anything. So this is, again, just a real simple example of a report. It's a list of projects with the owner and the modified date, start date, and finish date for each one of them. Real simple example. Let me take you back and show you one other here. There's one here called a resource capacity report. Another one of these built-in ones. You can use this as it is. You can modify it if you want to. Notice that this particular report, okay, we've got a column chart here. It's pretty busy. It's kind of hard to read. It's kind of hard to see what's going on here. But down here in the lower left-hand corner, you've got this chart tab and a data tab, two worksheet tabs, just like you might have in a real Excel spreadsheet that you have open up in Excel on your desktop. Right now we're looking at the chart tab. If I click on the data tab, it takes me to another page where it shows me a pivot table. Okay? How many of you folks are familiar with pivot tables in Excel? Okay? A lot of you. If you are not familiar with pivot tables, it's time. Okay? And they're not really that hard. Okay? Basically what you're doing is you're taking some sort of a lump sum of numeric data. Okay? It might be, and if we're talking about project-related data, we're talking about generally work hours or costs. Okay? Some sort of numeric data, and we're breaking it down different ways. So maybe we have costs, and we want to break down those costs by region, or we have work hours, and we want to break them down across department or project type or what have you. But we're basically taking numeric data, breaking it down different ways, slicing and dicing. That's really all a pivot table does for you. Okay? So this is a pivot table that's part of this report. And in this particular example, where it's taking capacity and allocated capacity. So basically capacity and assigned work. Okay? This information comes out of the database, and the way they name these things in a database are a little bit different than the user-friendly names that sometimes you see on the on the user part of the interface. But we've got two different types of numeric data that we're breaking down in this case by year, and then by month, and then by resource. And then if you notice here that if I can actually collapse down these different headings, so if I collapse down these months to hide that resource level detail, and there is no collapse all, like you might have in Excel, when I collapse down that detail to just show me monthly totals, and then switch back over to the chart tab again, that's a little better. So they're linked together. So when you expand and collapse things in the pivot table, they're expand and collapse, obviously, in the chart. So another kind of a cool example of some of these. Again, this is just an Excel spreadsheet with a pivot table and a pivot chart that's connected to that pivot table. Really quite easy to do in Excel. So I'm going to build a couple of those reports to kind of bring us back full circle to show you again how to analyze your your resource supply and demand and project server. This is just the tool that I'm going to use to do that. There's a templates library that comes built into this Business Intelligence Center. You'll notice here in the sample reports library, you probably noticed this, and there's also one in the templates library. There's an English folder. You might have your organization might have folks from all around the world, or at least in multiple countries, speak multiple languages. Therefore, Microsoft makes it possible for you to install different language packs on your project server, so that depending on who you are and where you're coming in from, you might you'll have maybe your native language that you can see in the interface here. And so if you do have multiple different language packs installed on your project server, you'd have different folders here, one for English, one for Japanese, Chinese, German, and so forth. Okay? So we just have an English folder here. We don't have the other language packs, any of the other language packs installed on our project server. So I'm just going to drill into that English folder. And so you'll see here that we have a bunch of templates. These are not actual real reports that have been predefined for us. These are templates that we can use as starters to get us going, building our own custom reports from scratch. Okay. There's another little folder here that's got some more templates in it. And one that I really like to use is this one here called OLAP Portfolio Analyzer. Okay. If you want to stick around after the session, we can talk about what OLAP means and OLAP cubes and all that kind of good stuff. That might be a little bit too technical for some folks, so if you folks aren't interested, then you can take off or what have you. But basically, these are just some more templates that we can use to create other types of fancy reports with Excel. So if I just simply click on this, open up this template, notice that this time, it doesn't open it up automatically just in the web browser, like we saw with those sample reports. Okay? It launched it right in Excel. Now, you might be wondering what versions of Excel that this will support. Okay? You can use Excel 2010 or Excel 2007 to build these Excel reports for Project Server 2010. Okay? Nothing older than that, though. It basically has to be in a version that supports the XLSX format. Okay? So basically here I've got an empty spreadsheet with an area there for me to build a pivot table. So what I want to do here is first I'll show you how to model the demand. Right? And again, we're modeling demand in Project Server in this case by looking at how much work is assigned to the generic resources in our system. Okay? So when we're generating our pivot table here, we're looking at that numeric data that we're breaking down is going to be assigned work. So over here on the right-hand side in this pivot table field list panel, I have a list of a whole bunch of different types of fields of information that I can pull into this pivot table. And the top part of this list, this list is broken into different sections. Okay? But the first section, the largest section of this pivot table field list, is all fields of numeric data that I can break down different ways. So I'm going to go down here to the end of that first section where work is listed, and I'll just check the checkbox next to the work field, and that will include the work field in my pivot table. All right? So here's how many hours of assigned work are in my project server right now. 10,522.9892 hours. We're very precise. Okay? I'd like to break that down different ways. In this case here, I'd like to break it down by those skills that we were looking at earlier. Well, I just happen to have a resource skills field that I can add to my pivot table. And it's, again, if you're not familiar with pivot tables, it's actually pretty easy. Once you understand the concepts, it's actually really easy to build a pivot table. So just with a couple of mouse clicks here, you can see that I took that work lump sum value of numeric data, and I just broke it down by skill type. So now I've got a little over 3,000 hours of work that are assigned to the application development folks, and 1,593 hours to client support folks, and so forth. You'll notice here that there is a little plus sign next to each one of these headings on the left-hand side. If you expand that, you'll see that these are actually skills and sub-skills, or maybe skill groupings, and then little detailed skills or competencies, you may call them. So you can actually go right down to this detailed competency level. I've got 152 hours of work I need a JavaScript person to do. I don't know when yet. At some point, I need somebody who knows JavaScript to do 152 hours of work. It might be on one project, it might be on multiple projects. I don't know. Not yet, anyway. Let me just collapse that application development heading back down here. Here's my grand total down here at the bottom, 10,522.989. I want to add that time dimension to this now. That's actually down at the very bottom of my field list here. Time, there it is. If I check that, it automatically adds it across the top. So down the side, I'm breaking down my work hours by a skill type, and across the top, we have time frames. Now, based on how I know pivot charts work, I'm actually going to take this and generate a pivot chart to get that line chart that I gave you an example of earlier. Based on what I know about how those charts work, okay, I'm going to need to flip-flop these fields that are on the top and down the side. Okay, I'm going to want the time down the left-hand side, and I'm going to want the skills across the top. That's actually very easy to do. Below the list of fields in this pivot table field list panel, okay, these are where those fields currently reside on the pivot table. Okay? The row labels, so basically those labels that fall down the left-hand side that are generating the rows of data, okay? That's where the skills currently are. Across the top, that's where our time increments are. This is a drag and drop interface. So all I have to do, there's different ways you can do this, but what I think would be the easiest way to do it is just simply to take this time dimension and drag it over here to the row label area. Now notice both of those field breakdowns are down the left-hand side. They're broken down by skill and then by year or time frame. And then I'm going to take my skills and drag those back up over here and turn that into a column label. So I just flipped my pivot table around. Again, notice that not only can I expand these application or these skill groupings to see the more detailed skills below them, I can also expand these time frames. We just see years right now. If I want to expand those by clicking the little plus sign next to each one of them, I can see quarters. If I want to drill in even further, I can go down to months or weeks or even days. Okay? Maybe we just want to look at the quarterly detail for now. That's good enough for our purposes. Okay. All right. So this is a nice start. We've got the numbers here. If you want to sit there and stare at the numbers, you can probably see get an idea of, if you can visualize this in your head, where you got your different levels of demand on these different skill levels in your organization. Okay. I like pictures though. Okay. When I build a project schedule in Microsoft Project, I like to look at the Gantt chart. I don't understand these people that just take that vertical divider and they just drag it all the way over to the right and they just work in the data columns. I don't get it, but some people, that's how they do it. I like to see pictures. So I'm going to create a real simple, real quick line graph to represent this data visually. So with my cursor somewhere on this pivot table, I'll go up here to the Insert ribbon, and looky there, let's create a line chart. Bam. Now I can drag this around and resize it and do all kinds of fun things with it here. But basically, this is a breakdown over time of your how much work is being demanded of each of these different types of resources. Okay? And okay, now we've got kind of a busy spreadsheet going on here, but you'll notice if I go back here and I expand these quarters, you can see those time frames are automatically being expanded in the chart. So if I want to see that monthly detail or even further, I can do that. Now, if this were going to be to make this a nice polished, finished product, I might take this and copy it. I just selected it and did a Control-C, and I'm going to do a Control-V to paste that into another worksheet. So then I can just switch back and forth here. I guess I don't need this first one anymore. I'll go ahead and delete that out. So now I've got that nice separation here. They're still connected together. If I expand out the quarters to see the months, and then flip back over to my other sheet where my chart is, okay, I'm starting to see the month detail, right? For me, this is a lot easier to visualize than this. But that's just me. I'm kind of funny like that. Okay? So, here's your demand represented graphically. This is basically 1/2 of your demand and supply chart, right? So now I want to create another report, or I can even probably just add to this report to represent the supply. Maybe I'll just add to this report. Create another worksheet here, and I'm going to insert a new fresh pivot table. When you use one of those templates to create a pivot table, through the Business Intelligence Center, it gets you started with one pivot table. Okay? It doesn't give you a chart or anything. It just gets you started with your first pivot table. If you want to create more pivot tables or more pivot charts, you have to just do those on your own. Okay? It's not tough, though. So I just went up here to the insert column, insert ribbon rather. I'm going to insert a new pivot table. I'm going to pull that data from an external data source. So the Project Server reporting database, or actually this is pulling from one of these OLAP databases that I mentioned earlier, but it's pulling that information from a database. And I'm going to pick this connection that's already been configured here. When you connect an Excel spreadsheet to a data source to pull that information out and display it in Excel, you have to tell Excel where to go to get that information. Okay? So basically the way that's done is that you set up a connection in Excel, and you tell Excel then basically where to go for that data, which data to extract, and how are you going to authenticate yourself. So it has to give you, usually, at least with Project Server anyway, that data is going to be locked down. You're not just going to let anybody into that database and pull out any kind of data they want. Okay? So in the case of here Project Server, you have to authenticate. You have to tell the system, who are you? So that it can say, okay, yes, you do have permission to access this data. Come on in and get it. So anyway, all that information is encapsulated into a connection, kind of like a little capsule of information that's embedded in the spreadsheet. So that's why I'm referring to this choose connection here. A connection's already been embedded in this Excel template, so I don't need to go and create that information. I just select the connection that's already in there, courtesy of Microsoft. Okay. So again, now we have another pivot table to start building. In this case here, we're going to not look at the assigned work. Okay? We're looking at the remaining availability now of the real people. Okay, so again, that's the capacity minus the assigned work. That gap is the remaining availability. Okay? Now that's actually, just as a little side note here, that's not generally a piece of information that's included and available in your Project Server system. That's something, though, that your local friendly Project Server administrator, though, can create for you. And then, so you can create a field. There's a field built in called capacity for each resource. There's a field built in for assigned work, but there's no remaining availability. But your Project Server administrator can basically create a little formula, create a custom little field in the system with a formula behind it that just subtracts those two numbers to give you the remaining availability. So just a little side note there. If you're interested in how to do that, come on up after the session or come stop by our booth. We're at booth 206, EPM Architects, and we'll tell you how to do that. It's actually quite easy. So if I look down through my pivot table field list here again, I'm going to add that field of numeric data that I'm going to break down. There we go. There's a rem avail, short for remaining availability. That's available in the system. I'm going to break that down by resource skill. Okay, so very similar to what we saw with the how much work was assigned to each generic resource. Okay, we've got how much remaining availability that the non-generic resources are going to have. Okay. One thing that I haven't shown you though is how to specify these are generics and these are not generics in these reports. I'll get to that next. I'm going to add the time dimension here. That's going to be down here at the end of the list again. There we go. I'm going to flip-flop these, take my time down and make that a row label, take my skills and put that up here as a column label. So again, we've got the same type of format that we've got in the other report. If we can align these formats, then it's going to be easier to basically lay them on top of one another and create that supply and demand curve. Okay? But again, we haven't told Excel yet to, in the first report, only show us assigned work to generic resources. And in what's ultimately going to be the supply report, we've got a demand report that we're working on here and a supply report that we're working on. We haven't told Excel how to single out just the non-generic resources on the supply side. To do that, I'm going to add a filter to each of these pivot tables. A filter, basically, just like in Excel, or if maybe you've used filters in Microsoft Project, it allows you to take a bunch of information and filter it down to only show you the specific types of information that you are interested in. And it hides all the other information. So in my demand portion of the report, I don't want to see all of the assigned work because this report right now is representing work assigned to generic and non-generic or real people resources. Okay, I only want to see generics. So I'm going to filter this information to only show generic work. If I go back to my pivot table field list here, there is a field in here called resource is generic. There it is, resource is generic. And I'm going to take it up here and put it in the report filter area. Now, you'll notice that this field is displayed in the upper left-hand corner of my pivot table. And I can pull that down and say, only show me resources where generic is true. Now you see my table just got updated. So now these numbers that we're looking at are numbers for work that's only assigned to generic resources. I'm going to do the flip-flop of that over in my supply report. I should actually rename these worksheets. This is demand. This is supply. This is my demand chart. And I'm going to create a supply chart also. But first I need to filter. So I'm going to add the same resource is generic field as a filter here, but instead of saying I do want generic resources, I'm going to say I don't want generic resources. Oh, I think I passed it here. Resource is generic. Put that in the filter area. And in this case here, I want real people, so I want generic is false. There we go. Numbers changed. So now this is the remaining availability for only essentially real people. And I could do the same sort of thing here with a chart, create a line chart, bada bing. So here's my supply. Okay. Now, of course, this isn't a simple little chart with a demand and supply with two lines on it, okay, that are crisscrossing their way across the timeline. Okay. And that's just because we're representing multiple roles here, or multiple skills, I should say, here. Okay? But if you're interested in looking at one particular type of a skill, it's actually very easy to filter these and say, you know what, I don't want to see all of them. I only want to see database admin skills. Okay, so there's the demand, the supply of folks who have database administration skills over time. And I could do the same thing back over here on my demand chart. I can filter this. Database admin, demand. Okay, so there's the demand. Supply, demand. Okay. Obviously, I don't want to have to flip back and forth. And if I wanted to take this, put it onto a separate worksheet, I could. Okay. Ultimately, I want to lay these on top of each other, though. So I can then filter and say, okay, show me one particular skill or one particular role. Show me the demand, show me the supply, and I can see where they're above and below each other to see where the shortages and overages are. Okay. In the interest of time here, I'm going to go to another area in the Business Intelligence Center, the EPM Reports Library. This is the library that I like to create when I create a new project server for somebody. This is custom reports that I've created. And here's a finished demand report that I've already created. So I'm doing the cooking show here thing where I put the cake in one oven, I pull the finished cake out of the other oven, right? Okay. So here's a finished demand report, broken down by quarter. Here's a finished supply report, broken down by quarter, again, for all these different types of skills. And here's the supply and demand report. And I basically have all the different reports combined in different tabs. Okay, there's demand pivot table, demand chart, supply pivot table, supply chart. Here's the supply and demand data combined. Here's the supply and demand data combined on a chart. Okay, and because of the time because of the scales that are used, you're going to want to probably drill into 2012 here, and filter these so that we're only seeing one type of demand and one type of supply, and see how they interact with one another. That's actually easier to do in Excel than in the web interface here. So I'll go ahead and crack this open with Excel. And now I have all the features available to me in Excel that I'm accustomed to. And so if I want to go over into that supply and demand chart tab and start filtering, okay, so for instance, maybe I want to see not all the skills, but only certain ones. Network and server, for instance. Okay, that narrows things down. And then if I want to drill into the time frames, expand and collapse those time frames, then I can come back here to the pivot table area, expand out those time frames, and drill into whatever kind of detail I want. Okay. It just so happens here that supply is above demand, so we have a lot more capacity available to us for this particular resource, or this particular type of resource. I might have one person who's a network and server person. I might have a whole team of 10 or 20 or 50. Okay, but anybody who has that particular skill, okay, I can see that we have a lot, certain, different amounts of excess capacity where they can take on more work, maybe take on more projects, or they can provide some assistance on other projects. Okay. So that being said, I'm going to flip back over to my PowerPoint and just wrap things up here. So if you want to implement this type of a process, and if you have Project Server 2010, okay, that doesn't mean you can't do this stuff in Project Server 2007, but it'll be you have to make sure that all the different pieces are in place and available to you. Again, for example, in Project Server 2010, you have all of the features of SharePoint Server 2010 available to you, including Excel services. Okay? If you're using Project Server 2007, okay, you may or may not have Excel services available to you, depending on the license level of SharePoint that you have. Okay, if you have SharePoint Server Enterprise Edition, then you'd have all the bells and whistles, including Excel services. If you have SharePoint Server Standard Edition, or even Windows SharePoint Services, okay, you won't have Excel services. Okay, so it doesn't mean just because you don't have 2010 doesn't mean you can't do this stuff. It just means that you may be missing some of the pieces, or you may not. All right. At any rate, some of the things that you're going to want to have in place in order to be able to do all this stuff is skills-based resource planning. Okay, we had to attach skills to all this stuff in order to be able to line up the generics with the real people, and then we could create the data pivot tables and pivot charts and line them all up. Okay, so there's a whole process around that. If you're interested in talking about it, come on up afterwards or stop by our EPM Architects booth and we can talk about it. So we'll be here all week, and we'll talk about what that means. It's a pretty detailed process, or it can be, capturing the skills of the people in your organization, especially if you have a large organization, and tracking that information. Okay, this is all based on the demand part of it is based on assigning generic resources to the tasks and projects. And if the work is not represented accurately and properly in those project schedules, then your data is not going to be very useful. So you're going to want to have accurate and accurate project scheduling practices in place, or relatively accurate, in order to represent that demand in the system. Okay, project and project server. Obviously. Maybe a little training will be involved in showing your resource managers and your project managers how to use these tools and how to manipulate, because, again, although we can create these reports with Excel, part of the idea is not only are they easy to create, but they're easy to manipulate. You'll notice that I took some of these reports and I opened them up with Excel and manipulated them to get the report just the way I wanted it, or to allow me to drill into just the amount of detail that I wanted to see. Okay? And again, like I mentioned earlier, if you're doing skills-based resource planning, you may want to get HR involved, because maybe they have some of this information already, or they can help you to gather and manage this skill information, because that's no small undertaking to capture and manage that. So, in closing, again, stop by our booth number 206, if you're interested in talking about this stuff anytime over the next couple of days. Okay, you can visit this website URL for some downloads and goodies. For instance, you can pick these up at our booth also. We've got a best practices guide for implementing Microsoft Project Server 2010. We've also got some quick reference cards for Microsoft Project 2010 with keyboard shortcuts and all the ribbon interface all spelled out. What are all the different buttons and what do they do? These are downloads that are available on our website. If you visit this address, then you can grab those as well as lots of other things. That's epmarchitects.com/PC2012, Project Conference 2012. There's that QR code again. I see some people with their phones out. Fantastic. Okay, you can go ahead and snap this if you want to, and that'll take you right to that URL. And that's about all I've got for you folks. Any questions? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yep. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Why did I do the task? So, okay. Right, so let me see if I can just sort of summarize what you just said. I referred to this, this task skills field back when we were looking at the original Microsoft project schedule. And we had, that allows us to attach skills to the individual tasks in the project. Okay. Now there is one thing that I didn't show you that you could do. It's a less detailed method of representing the demand on the resource in your organization, but you could have generated one of these Excel reports that basically, rather than breaking down the assigned work by resource, like I showed you, you could break down that assigned work by task. Okay, and then group that by those task skill fields. Okay, that would be another way of representing the demand. But again, in my opinion, that's not as accurate, not as detailed as what you can get by breaking that demand down by resource. You're right. There could be a mismatch there. Yes, you could. So there is a feature in there's a feature in Project Server that allows you to basically do resource matching. Okay. And so basically, I attached these task skill fields, task skill values to all the tasks in a project. Okay, and the point that I was really just trying to get across there was that allows you, if you want to, that part of the process was completely optional. Okay, but if you wanted to, as part of your early stage planning process, you could attach just skills to the tasks. And then when you go out and hunt for the resources to put on to staff that project, you could go out and look for the resources in the resource pool that have those same skills to put them on those tasks. Okay? But I basically skipped ahead and I already had those generic resources assigned. Right. Yeah. So that's a good point. So just to repeat what you just said there, the way I had that task field set up, you could only assign one or attach one single skill to each task in the project. Okay. Now, that's just basically because of the way I configured that task skill field as to only accept a single value. I could have set up that field to accept multiple values, but then that causes other issues with reporting. But you're absolutely right. That only allows you to attach one skill to each task in your project. Okay. Whereas if you do the resource-based, skill matching, then you could have multiple resources, maybe 2 or 3 resources on a given task with different skills. So you get the more detailed skill breakdown, even at that task level. Right. Okay. Okay. Yes, another question.
Your displays of your pivot tables all display work, and it's basically in hours. When you start dealing with hundreds of resources, people like to see things converted to FTEs.
Uh-huh.
You come up with techniques to convert those pivot work hours into FTEs.
Yeah, so converting work hours to FTEs is the question. How do you do that? It's kind of tricky because you have to take into account, you can't just take work hours and divide it to come up with FTEs, because that number that you have to divide it by depends on the time frame that you're looking at. Okay, if we're looking at a weekly time frame and you've got 40 hours of work, let's say, assigned, you take that and divide it by 40, you got 1 FTE, right? But what if it's not a week? What if it's 2 weeks or a month or a quarter? Okay, you have to use a different number to divide depending on which time frame you're looking at. So I haven't actually looked in detail at how to, if there's an easy way to do that or not. But I know that just I have thought about that before, and it's not as simple as just dividing by a constant, because it depends on the time frame.